Hi y'all, I'm Bailey of Well Read PhD. This is my cat, Pierogi. Who knows if he will stick around for the full video or not, but today I am bringing you my mid-year book freakout tag. If you don't know what book freakout tag is, it is essentially just a way for booktubers, bookstagrammers, other creators to document what their favorite and least favorite reads of 2024 so far have been. Today I'll bring you some of my yays and nays of 2024 so far. Let's get started. The best book I have read so far in 2024 has been Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Balli Jaswal. The story follows Nikki, who is an early 20-something Punjabi British girl living in London who has spent most of her life distancing herself from her traditional Sikh upbringing. However, she sees an ad at the local Gurdwara for a position teaching creative writing to women, and she is very excited for it, applies for the job. However, there's a huge miscommunication about the skill level of these women, and what follows is absolute chaos. I think this book has something for everyone. It was incredible. I loved it. I keep thinking about it. It has mystery. It has intergenerational family drama. It has gossip and scandal, romance, a very heavy hand of spice, which I normally don't go for, but I feel like it really worked in the context of this book. Widows are writing these really erotic stories and you're like, oh, this is coming from like this like tiny little auntie over there. But underneath all of the sort of shenanigans and antics that are going on, it allows for really complex characters and really authentic and gray area navigation of identity and womanhood. So overall, the story is fun. The characters are flawed and wonderful and so lovable. You just can't help but root for everyone in this novel. If you like the novel White Teeth by Zadie Smith or any of her work, or even the movie Bend It Like Beckham, I think you'll find a lot of similarities here. It creates a lot of space for nuanced discussions of identity and change and culture and religion in a way that I found really refreshing. I recommend picking this up if you have not yet. I can't wait to read her other books. And yeah, 5 stars, 6 stars, loved this book. I think about it all the time. The best sequel I've read so far in 2024 has been Game of Lies by Clare Mackintosh. This is the second installment in the Fionn Morgan series, which is a Welsh police procedural series. Stranded in the Welsh mountainside, 7 reality show contestants think that they are signed up for what they think is ostensibly a Survivor type show. However, when the show starts airing, the producer announces that they were selected not for their survival skills, but because each of them has a deep, dark secret that they would do anything to keep hidden. The game instead is to expose another player's secret or risk your own secret being leaked on international TV. When one contestant goes missing and then another person is murdered, Fionn has to go and investigate, which is tricky because she's not only working with Welsh detectives on site, but also English detectives across the border and trying to navigate the intricacies of her interpersonal relationships. This is a tiny, tiny town that she's grown up in, and so she has a lot of loyalties and personal knowledge that interferes with her police work. Fionn is one of my absolute favorite detective characters. She is quick, she is brash, she is loud and often wrong, deeply wrong, and doesn't do things by the book like ever. But she is also deeply kind and caring, and you can't help but root for her and hope that she sort of figures out the mess of the life that she's in. If you haven't read the first installment of this series, I really recommend starting with The Last Party. It gives you a lot of great background. I would not read this sequel without reading The Last Party, but when you read it, I think you'll really enjoy it. Clare Mackintosh is a really great writer. She brings a really nice flavor and political landscape to not only the ethics of policing. Fionn is really trying to navigate if police do the right thing, if the right thing is always the legal thing. And there are lots of discussions about Wales, Welsh heritage, Welsh language, sort of the rift between the English and the Welsh, which adds a little bit more depth to your typical crime procedural or multiple POV mystery story. So I think of these as sort of a more sophisticated take on something like a Mary Kubica book like Local Woman Missing, or the Lucy Foley books like The Paris Apartment, The Guest List. I think that Clare Mackintosh's writing is a little better than both of those. And I think that it's just a more interesting and compelling story. New release that you haven't read but want to, I have two for this one. So I have Anniebot by Sierra Greer as my first one. This is sort of a speculative fiction where Anniebot was created to be like the perfect girlfriend for this man named Doug. It's very her, very Scarlett Johansson-ish. But because it is designed to not only satisfy his physical needs, but also his emotional needs, he has installed an AI component to Anniebot, where Annie can, listen to conversations, learn from conversations, and grow in a way that makes her an easy conversation companion and can remember things that he has told her. But as she learns and grows and continues to be in this relationship with Doug, who is also her owner, there are a lot of things she's learning where she starts questioning and starts evolving and trying to figure out, not only what is Doug trying to do, but what does Annie owe herself. And so I really want to read this book. I have heard great things by everyone on Bookstagram and BookTube about it. I'm really interested, especially in seeing how the voice of Annie changes, because apparently she starts off the beginning of the book with kind of basic vocabulary, and then as she learns and grows, just like that AI does, she becomes more advanced in her thinking, and I really want to see how that's reflected in the voice of Annie throughout the book. The second one that I really want to read is The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. I think I'm saying her name right. The Ministry of Time, a woman starts working as a bridge, who is basically a liaison in this program that brings expats into the country. But these aren't expats from geography, they are expats from time. So she sort of brings in and hosts and helps people from different time periods to our current time. So this woman is tasked with sort of being the ambassador for Commander Graham Kaur, who was an Arctic explorer in the 1800s. And they meet, they have to be roommates, and they begin this really complicated relationship where they not only are learning from each other, but also piecing together like what the organization that they're working for is doing and what they hope to get out of these exchanges. And so there's a little bit of mystery, a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of romance. And I'm not really too much of a romance girl, but the way it's described reminds me of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And so I liked that one. And I really want to see if this one works for me. My most anticipated release of the second half of the year is God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I loved her previous book, Long Bright River, and I think Liz Moore is such a gifted author. She has a really great job of describing these complicated family relationships, and I really want to see what it looks like when there's more of a mystery. I really want to see what more of a mystery and more of a natural setting does in her writing. So God of the Woods is apparently about a missing child whose disappearance sends shockwaves through three very different groups of people around the area. So people who are at an opulent Adirondack summer estate, a rustic teen summer camp, and the blue-collar community that serves both the estate and the summer camp. So I'm really excited to see how all three of those communities and worlds kind of come together and how those relationships play out. Whew. Biggest disappointment of 2024 so far. This one pains me to talk about, but In the Form of a Question by Amy Schneider. If you don't know who Amy Schneider is, she is the winningest woman in Jeopardy history, and she is also a trans woman. So I was really excited to read about not only her Jeopardy journey, but also her gender and sexuality journey. However, this book really fell flat for me. When we're talking about memoir, I want to make sure that people know that I am not critiquing Amy's life. I am not critiquing her gender identity or her transition or any parts of her journey. I am not critiquing her as a person or anything that's happened in her life. I went into this expecting a lot about her Jeopardy journey and her love of knowledge and a life of curiosity, as she sort of coins it as. And instead what I got was honestly what felt like someone pushed her to write things for a book deal so that she'd sell a bunch of copies, and she didn't really want to write a book. So by that I mean a lot of the book was dedicated to footnotes, which started off as a cute and clever conceit, but quickly became tedious and didn't add anything else to what she was talking about. She also didn't talk about Jeopardy hardly at all, which is fine, but I wish we had talked a little bit more about her learning journey. And to be very honest, some of those personal interest essays were openly alluded to as, my editor tells me I have to meet a word count, so I'm going to talk about the tarot. She literally spends a whole essay explaining each card of the major arcana in tarot, which made no sense. And then the next chapter is like about Daria, the TV show from the 90s. There are a couple of strong essays, and it felt like she ran out of time, ran out of steam, just got lazy with it, or just didn't want to do it. And I hate to say it, but it felt like filler for trying to hit a word count. And honestly, it was one of the only memoirs I've ever read that made me not like the person after I read it. I met Amy one time in New York, very briefly, at a bar where we were karaokeing, and bought her a drink, and she seems super cool. I think I'd enjoy hanging out with her, but this book was not it for me. The biggest surprise to me was Wine People by Michelle Wildgen. Looking at the cover of this book, this is not something I would ever pick up. It looks like it might be a romance. It looks like it might be very frothy and bubbly and very like rom-com-y. Overall, it was a surprisingly deep novel about this complicated female friendship where two women, Ren and Thessaly, are some of the only young women to work at a wine sales company. And so they're sort of vying to figure out where they fit in the ranks and prove themselves. To across France and Germany and Italy and California wine country and Wisconsin even. So it's very jet-setty and very fun. But what I liked most about it is that it followed these two women throughout their lives in a really interesting female friendship that did not really focus on, romantic relationships at all. Ren and Thessaly are opposite in almost every way, and they sort of join forces in this male-dominated industry to make it, but also end up sort of competing against each other, yet uplifting each other in a lot of complicated ways. I enjoyed the incredible lyrical passages about wine. I found that it taught me about wine without getting too technical. I really liked this. I think some of the character development and time jumps made this a little bit of like a 4-star for me, but I was so pleasantly surprised with this. It kind of reminded me of like a PG Succession, and if you took Guilt by Jamie Brenner and didn't make it about jewelry but made it about wine instead. I really don't have another comp for this one. I haven't read anything quite like it. So I was pleasantly surprised. I think it's a great summer read, and I highly recommend reading it if you have not already. My new favorite author that I have discovered very recently is Alina Grabowski. I loved her first book. It was her debut novel, Women and Children First. I talk about it a lot more in this video, which I will link down here, but I just think she has an incredible voice. I think she finds details that seem really minute and make them mean a lot about a character. I think she writes relationships and dialogue really well, and I just love the lush description of the setting that this story takes place in. Women and Children First is based around a tragedy that occurs in a small town in Massachusetts, and I think that in the hands of another writer, it could have gone really kitschy really fast, and I think she handled it with such delicacy and grace that I am so pumped to see what else she puts out. I think I said this in the other video, but I could not believe this was a debut, and I would have happily just sort of injected 300 more pages of this universe into my veins. I loved every single word, so highly recommend it. Go check it out if you haven't. My new favorite character, I think, has to be Nodar out of Hard by a Great Forest. Hard by a Great Forest by Leo Vardashvili is set in Tbilisi, Georgia, where a man named Saba has to go from London to go investigate his brother and father's disappearance throughout Tbilisi. So he teams up with Nodar, who is a taxi driver whose car barely works. It is a character of its own. And Nodar is this sort of multi-dimensional but like stupidly gruff Eastern European grump who is always smoking a cigarette, always drinking, questionably hygiened, but is very fundamentally good. Has really interesting motivations and really interesting mannerisms, but he also cares deeply about relationships with strangers, with family members. He has this deep determination to find his daughter and also to help Saba find his family in any way that he can. He's constantly making friends, he's constantly cracking jokes, getting them in and out of sticky situations, and I just find him so lovable and so charming, and I think that you will too. Hard by a Great Forest by Leo Vardashvili was the first book I read that was set in Georgia, well, the country of Georgia, and I think that it really gave me a lot to research, a lot to think about, and gave me insight into a part of the world that I don't see very often featured in fiction. It was heartwarming, it was sad, it was bittersweet in a lot of ways, but you meet some really great characters like Nodar on the journey throughout, and I think that it's definitely worth your time. A book that made me cry was American Marriage by T.R.E. Jones. This is a complicated love story about two newlyweds who go on their honeymoon, and the husband is then falsely accused of committing a crime and then is falsely imprisoned for several years. And so this new husband and wife are trying to communicate through letters, and while one of them is in prison, one of them is out of prison, and figure out how to navigate that and how to navigate the changes in their relationship, and it is just heartbreaking. This made me grapple with complexities of relationships in ways that I've never seen them depicted. I think a big problem with me in reading things that are around romantic relationships is that frequently you could have just been honest with this person, or you could have just said X to this person and your problem would have been solved. You wouldn't have had this big argument or whatever. But in this novel, truly all of the circumstances are beyond the character's control, and you really feel for them. You're like, how would you navigate that? You really reflect on your own relationships and how you would navigate if your husband, which mine is just chilling right here apparently. It really makes you think, yeah, what if my husband was wrongfully imprisoned and no matter what he said was sent away for 10, 15 years? Like, would you move on with someone else? Would you try to make it work? How would you do that? How do you have these hard conversations? And then when they get out, if they get out, what do you owe them? What do you owe yourself? And like, what does that relationship look like? And so I thought that this book navigates a lot of complexities of Black masculinity and womanhood, and how race and gender define different expectations that communities might have of folks in these situations or outside of these situations. What is a normal relationship? What kind of love you can have for other people. I think each character is so well written, so distinct, super empathetic. I think everything that comes out of their mouth is just, you're like, yeah, I feel you. I get it. I know exactly what you're coming from. You're totally right. But each of these three very different perspectives are all totally right. And how do you deal with that? How do you make all of them weave together, or do you? And what do you do with them? So I really loved this book. I loved Roy. I loved Big Roy. Those were two other characters that I don't think I will easily forget. But if you haven't picked this one up, it is heavy, but it is so, so good. One of my favorite books of this year, but you will cry like hell at the ending. So be warned. A book that made me happy is one of my most recent 5-star reads, Killers of a Certain Age by Deanna Raybourn. It follows four assassins who are now going into assassin retirement because they have been assassins for 40 years. I talk a lot about it in last week's video, so I'll link that here so you can get a full recap of it. But I think this book was laugh out loud funny, hilarious characters, great antics, high tension, fast pace, and I just really, really enjoyed it, and it made me laugh out loud at a couple of points. So check that out there, and I hope you read that one too. The book with the most beautiful cover I have read so far is Search by Michelle Hunovan. I think that's how you say her last name. It circles around the search for a new minister at a Universalist Unitarian church. If you are unfamiliar with Unitarian Universalist congregations, I'm going to link their Wikipedia link down here so you can see a little bit more about what they believe. Essentially, what they believe is that everyone's faith, spiritual, or religious journey is valid, including the lack of a religious or spiritual journey and any of the major traditions or religions as well. So it's sort of syncretic. It takes a lot of beliefs from everywhere. This is extremely important because in this book, we follow a search committee that is trying to find the next minister for this church. This search committee is supposed to encompass the entire congregation of the church. So you have people of diverse backgrounds, diverse faith identities, diverse gender identities, and occupation and race and ethnicity and different priorities. But what is most sort of prevalent is this rift between the old church of the folks who have been going there for so-and-so years and say, you know, well, this isn't how things were done, and the new church who really want to lean into other aspects of the congregation and the faith writ large that aren't necessarily as traditional. So you are a fly on the wall for this search committee made up of members of the congregation from ages 20 to 70 who all have totally different priorities, totally different experiences and faith journeys that they are bringing to this search and biases they're bringing in, and finding out how they are going to narrow it down to candidates that they want to have at this church and ultimately decide on who will be their new minister. It is so good. Not only is there a lot of incredibly deep discussions about religion and life and faith, also there is this really just amusing cast of characters who are all kooky in their own ways and all a little bit strange. But it is truly an ensemble cast of characters that keep you turning pages to figure out who has swayed who to this perspective or who's gotten who to vote for this person. And I think it's really enjoyable and surprisingly really profound and really, really entertaining at the same time. A book I need to read by the end of the year is one that is very important to me. It's by one of my good friends. It's called 10 Men by Kitty Ruskin. This is her debut memoir. At the beginning of 2019, Kitty decided that she wanted to embrace her singledom and sexuality and go on dates and have casual sex with whoever she felt like. So Kitty got on the apps, she started swiping. And what followed was sometimes sexy and funny and entertaining, but also sometimes was really fraught with danger and pain. And so this is something I am just so proud of my friend for writing and thinking about, you know, the dangers and vulnerabilities of being a young woman. Can't wait to read it. I know that it's going to be hard for me to read in a lot of places, but I'm just ultimately so proud of my friend. This is her debut memoir, and you can read her writing in the Times of London, Time magazine, where she is currently working. But this is just something new and altogether something I really look forward to reading and hearing her story on. So yeah, those are my highlights and other thoughts on books of 2024 so far. If you have any favorites or if you have any reactions to ones that I've read that you've also read or recommendations, I would love to hear them in the comments below or on my Instagram, also wellreadphd. I love hearing from you guys. I love talking to you and talking about books. And so thank you again for watching and letting me be a part of your day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you think they might be into book yapping. And we are both going to say, have a good week and happy reading from me and the squirmiest, oh my God. Have a great rest of your week.